Thank you all for joining us today for the Grad School Prep Series Letters of Recommendation workshop. Joining us today is Dr. David Copeland, Associate Professor, Department of Psychology. He's going to help us understand the importance of forming a strong professional relationship, how to identify potential letter writers, and how to ask for letters of recommendation. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right. Thank you very much for inviting me to talk today. For those of you who don't know, I'm the undergraduate director, program coordinator in psychology, and I've been teaching a course called Introduction to the Psych Major for the past 5, 6, 7 years now, and essentially covers how to get the most out of the major and for thinking about careers, and importantly how to prepare for grad school if that's part of your path. So one of the ways in which you need to prepare for grad school is to start thinking about letters of recommendation. So in today's talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about the importance of letters of recommendation, who should write them, how do you ask for them, and how can you try to make them a little bit better. All right, so let's get started on the first slide here. Essentially, when you're applying for graduate programs, you're going to do things such as write an essay or a personal statement. You're going to include information such as your CV. You're going to be talking a lot about yourself. You're going to be putting together your own list of accomplishments. But one thing that a lot of graduate programs, if not all graduate programs, want to know about is they want to hear from outside people. They want to hear sort of an unbiased evaluation of you, your accomplishments, your potential to succeed. We're a little bit biased when we talk about ourselves. We all think we're great. Hopefully you have, if you don't, have some confidence with your grad school application materials. And if you need to, fake it till you make it. That's a good saying. I think that applies in a lot of scenarios. But with letters of recommendation, you're essentially getting outside evaluations from typically 3 people. Sometimes it can be as high as 4. You occasionally might see it as low as 2, but 3 is very, very common in terms of the expectation. If you don't see any information about the numbers of letters of recommendation to include, assume that it's 3. All right. So one of the very first questions that a lot of people ask about letters of recommendation is whom should they ask? So let's go through the next slide here and check this out. I'm going to jump over to the right side of the screen very quickly. First of all, to get out of the way, whom you should not ask. Number one, don't ask family members. Don't ask psychologists, counselors, therapists who are treating you. Basically, anyone who is in your personal life. Again, the purpose of letters of recommendation are to get an unbiased outsider's opinion of you, and whose mom isn't going to say great things about you if they were asked to brag about you in a letter of rec. So you don't want to go there. Instead, who do you want to ask? You want to ask people who know you best. Typically, for most graduate programs, this is going to involve professors. One of the reasons for why professors make up the majority of letter writers is that the admissions committees for graduate programs are going to be based on professors from that particular program. And whose opinion do they trust? They trust professors, their colleagues in the profession. And so you want to ask professors for the majority of your letters. Now, I'll get into some details about what I mean by majority. Students ask me a lot of questions about, oh, okay, so you say professors, so let's get into the details here. Do they have to be from my major or field? I'm going to say that, yes, most of them should be, but not all of them have to be. As an example, when I was applying for graduate school, I was in the field of psychology. And so my best letter was from a psychology professor with whom I worked. Another one was from another psychology professor that I took for a couple classes from. And then my third letter was actually from an organic chemistry professor. And I essentially thought that that was a great one because I was very proud to survive through organic chemistry and to do very well. And I had worked a lot with this professor, and it was the second semester of it. So it was a much smaller class. And so I got a little individual attention, and I thought I could get a very good letter talking about my capabilities of succeeding in a difficult area. Students will ask me, can grad students write me a letter of recommendation? I'm going to say, well, try to go for full-time professors, but if a grad student is going to write you a phenomenal letter, you can go with that. You might be in a scenario where a grad student was your instructor. That can be good. One of the drawbacks that you might run into is that grad students will come and go as they earn their degrees and graduate and go off and get a job. So you might lose track of a graduate student if you took that person a couple years back. Um, so really, look first at professors who are full-time faculty members in your area. Similar types of issues with part-time instructors. Again, part-time instructors can be great. You can maybe take multiple classes from them. They could write really good things about you, but again, they're part-time. They might not be around forever. So do keep that in mind. If you're talking about graduate students from maybe working in a research lab, maybe you worked in a research lab and most of your time was spent working with the grad students. In those scenarios, what I would do is I'd probably have a conversation with that grad student and say, hey, do you think I should ask the professor from that research lab to write me a letter? And you can, kind of feed them the information based on your experiences working with me, or even write a draft of the letter and then the professor can put it in their own words. And so that's usually my advice there. A lot of students transfer. They start at one school, move to another. I have people ask me, can I use professors from a past school? If it was a phenomenal professor, you had a great relationship with that professor, yes, with one caveat. Have you stayed connected with that professor? Do they remember you? And so that's a very important consideration. And so if you maintain that relationship, then that could be a strong consideration for you. So don't be concerned with they have to be from the current institution. But do maintain the idea that they do have to remember you and you do have to maintain a connection. How do you maintain connections? Just stay in touch. Maybe send an email once a year to say, hey, professor, I just wanted to say thank you again for your class. I really learned a lot. I just wanted to give you an update that I'm, thinking about applying for grad school. And so in the future, I might, come to you for a letter of recommendation if you're able to. And, just simple things like that, just a simple email, a simple thank you. It's just a very easy way to stay in touch with a professor. People ask, well, I did some internship work or I was in a really deep volunteer position. Can I use one of a supervisor from that position? My answer to that is yes. While you want the majority of your letters to be from professors, you can use a supervisor from an applied experience. That is a great way. In some scenarios, you might even make that maybe a fourth letter. So maybe you have three good professors and add that as your bonus fourth letter. Because even though they say three letters, sometimes they give you the application portals will give you the opportunity to include an extra one in there if you so choose. But that's not always the case. So just do pay attention. So one other very big piece of advice about whom you should ask, I have on the very next slide here, is that I really, really encourage students to try to be proactive when you're figuring out the people that are going to write your letters. And what I mean by that is, if possible, try not to wait till your senior year when you're ready to put those graduate school applications together and say, all right, I'm ready to graduate. Who's going to write my letters? So let's see. Well, I really never took any professors twice, things like that. And so you don't want to be in that situation where you're struggling to come up with letter writers. If you can be proactive, for example, maybe you built a relationship with a professor, you enjoyed their class, you did a lot of fun, great things like you wrote a paper, did a class project, and so on and so forth. You love the way that they explained things. You learned a lot from that professor. Consider taking a second class from that professor. When you have two classes from a professor, that gives them so much more to write about in a letter of recommendation than if you just took one class from that professor. Number one, maybe you wrote a paper in one class and did a oral presentation in another. That gives them two projects to talk about. Maybe the fact that you did earn A's in two classes with them makes them more confident that you're a very strong student and might increase their use of powerful adjectives when they write their letter. Maybe they'll be a little bit more confident in their recommendation. That'll come across in the way that they write their paragraphs. As I mentioned earlier, maintain contact with past professors. If you got a good professor, they really mentored you well, you met with them, outside of class, or you talk to them, you're really active within class discussions, things like that, maintain that contact, write to them once a year, thank them for the impact that they made on your life. Let them know about what you're doing in your future. Professors, keep those things short, but professors like that. We like hearing from past students like that, especially when things are positive. And then finally, also consider getting involved with activities such as research, organizations, or student groups. One of the reasons why that's good is because a lot of times in those scenarios, you can work much more closely with professors. So, for example, if you're working in a research lab, you're going to be working with them on a weekly basis, maybe across multiple semesters, and you're going to build up a lot of accomplishments, build up a lot of goodwill with those professors by demonstrating your work over sustaining that good work over a long period of time. Working in an organization, for example, maybe you work as an officer, let's say you're president, treasurer, secretary, something like that. You're going to work closely with that faculty advisor, and they're really going to get to know you well personally, as well as demonstrating a lot of soft skills. And those professors, a lot of times, can write you very strong letters of recommendation. But by being proactive and taking steps to build those strong connections and relations, that's one of the ways in which you can ensure that you're going to have some good letters, or at least some good potential, at least strong letters, when you get to the time when you're going to be applying for graduate school. All right, so let's move on and talk about the idea of you figured out who you want to ask for letters, and how do you go about doing it? Well, there's no real set way to do it. You can do it over email, you can stop by their office, you can talk after class. Any of these approaches can work. Just do the approach that's most comfortable for you. If you're better face to face, approach them face to face. If you're better over email, then approach them via email. And you just want to simply say, hey, I'm applying for master's programs in this area, and the deadlines are in, February, March of this coming year, or I'm applying to PhD programs in this area, and the deadlines are coming up in December and January of this year. I really enjoy, write a simple sentence about your connection to them. Maybe I took your whatever class, 1 year ago, and I did really well and I learned a lot. And just simply ask, would you be willing to write me a letter? You may even also, and this works a little bit better if you're face to face, follow that up by saying, now, this might sound awkward, but I also just want to follow that up by asking, would you be willing to write me a good letter of recommendation? And that can be an important distinction, because a lot of professors might say, yes, I can write you a letter of recommendation, but that doesn't tell you how good of a letter that's going to be. And what I mean by that is that there's different types of letters that can be written. You can get a phenomenal letter. This is typically a professor with whom you've worked with them across multiple semesters, maybe in a research lab and in a class, or maybe multiple classes. They're typically going to have a lot of things to say about you. They're going to use strong adjectives. They're going to be more confident in their recommendation. So you're going to get a really strong letter of recommendation, probably a good page long, sometimes more than a page. Other professors might be able to write you a good, solid letter of recommendation. That's fine. You don't need great recommendations from every professor. A good one, will suffice in a lot of cases. But you don't want to get into the realm where you're getting maybe an okay letter, or possibly even worse, a bad letter. A lot of professors will just outright say, no, I'm not going to write you a letter of recommendation if they would be writing a bad letter, because it's not very comfortable to, say that you don't recommend someone or something along those lines. But in some cases, maybe the student was just okay. Maybe, okay, they did well in my class, but the class just involved multiple choice tests. I don't really know anything about their writing or their speaking skills or their ability to work as part of a team. Or maybe they just really don't remember you, or maybe they just don't know you very well at all. You were just one person amongst 200 people in a lecture hall. In those cases, you're probably just going to get an okay letter. And so that's where asking if they can write you a good letter might pay off, in terms of knowing that from the get go. Because if you're not going to get at least a good letter from them, you might want, and you have other options for letter writers, you might want to move on to other options if they're honest with you in terms of the quality of letter that they're going to write. All right. So let's say you get some people, they agree to write your letters for you. What's the next step? All right. So if we move on to the next slide, one of the key things that I really want to emphasize is that I really want you to organize your information. Make the job of your letter writers as easy as possible. And this goes to kind of human nature. If you ask me to write a letter of recommendation for you, if you made my life easy, then by human nature, I'm going to feel better about you, have more positive feelings for you. And maybe that's going to come across with a slightly stronger letter than maybe if you made my life, a little bit of a nightmare. For example, I've seen some students who will send like 14 different emails with different pieces of information about their application and information about how to submit the letters and things like that. Well, I get 50 emails a day, if not more, whether it's from students or administration or what or colleagues. And so if you're sending me 14 separate emails with different pieces of information, I'm likely to lose some of that information, especially if I'm writing letters for a bunch of students, which happens, pretty typically each year. So to make life easier on people that are writing your letters, take a few steps. Number one, give at least 3 weeks notice, if not more. Number two, I want to just, spring it on them and say, hey, I need this next week. Number two, provide all of your information all at once in one single email. In the past, I used to say, give them a folder with all the information in one place, but nowadays just, everything's electronic. So just do it in a single email. This is after you've asked them and they agreed to let you write, write the letter. They agreed to write a letter for you. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to send them a single email. One of the pieces of information you're going to do is you're going to provide them a list of all of your programs that you're applying for, the due dates for the letters of rec, with any submission instructions. Perhaps you're applying to slightly different programs. This could affect the letter of recommendation that they write. For example, I've seen some students who will apply to both PhD and master's programs. Maybe the master's programs are their backup in case they don't get into the PhD programs. Well, I might think that that student is a pretty good student and, could do well in a PhD program, but I think they would do really well in a master's program. Well, that might affect my letter that I write for them. And so maybe in that scenario, I might change the letter slightly if I'm, sending it to a master's program as opposed to the ones that I send to the PhD program. So having that information all in one, use an Excel file, use a table, to have this in there so it's simple for them. When I mean the submission instructions, that is, are they emailing it to a certain person? If so, what's the email address? In some cases we still have to send certain places want letters submitted via snail mail. So if that's the case, make sure you give specific instructions. If it has to go into a website or an online portal, make sure you give information or a link to that with instructions. If you can fill out information for them, go ahead and do that. If there's any forms that a professor has to fill out along with their letter, give them a copy of the form or note on your table that there's a form in the email for them. Anything like that, just keep it organized, make it simple for them. Also, ask a professor if they want you to remind them when there's maybe a week or two to go. Professors are human. I get busy with things. The professors get a lot of things eating up their time, and sometimes things slip through the cracks, especially if maybe we have your email and it's in our inbox, but then as we get more and more emails, it gets buried underneath there. Maybe we added to our calendar, but maybe we've got a bunch of things. Professors sometimes, for forgetful. It's very helpful in a lot of cases. In my view, I love the fact that students ask me if I want a reminder because I'm like, yes, I try my best to get this out in the next week or so. But if I happen to forget, I want that reminder to make sure nothing slips through the cracks because I don't want to do wrong by that student that I agreed to write a letter for them. So it's not a bad thing to ask professors if they want a reminder. If they don't want a reminder, they'll just tell you they don't want a reminder. All right, so next step. Let's move on to the next slide here. Essentially, here, what I want to talk about is the idea that do your best to help them write a strong letter. And what I mean by that is give them information about you. This is very important. Professors work with a large number of students every single semester. We get brand new sets of students every class we teach. We might work with multiple students in labs. Sometimes it's been a couple of years since we had you in a class or interacted with you. And so we really need reminders about information, and we need points of emphasis and kind of thrown in our faces. Different professors are going to use this information differently. I, for one, love having this information because I borrow from it and include it in my letters of recommendation to beef them up, to make them stronger. So number one, definitely always include a copy of your CV. Your CV is going to have a snapshot of your academic history and your accomplishments. And so if I need a reminder of the things that you've done, I can look at that. If I want to know what else you've done besides what I directly have interacted with you, I can look at that. It's a lot of times surprised. I'm like, oh, hey, look, this person did 2 internships. I didn't know about that. And I can throw a couple lines in there saying, in addition to the time spent working with me on research or in my classes, the student has also shown motivation by getting involved with internships. Um, Also include your essay or personal statement. Now, ideally, you're going to be personalizing these for each of your applications for graduate school, but you probably have a big chunk of your essay or personal statement that's going to apply to all of your ones. So just simply give one representative copy of an essay or personal statement. No need to send all of them for all the different unique programs you're applying to, unless they're very different, but just one representative copy. And the reason why that's important is because it's a reminder of how good of a writer you are. I can take a look at that and be reminded and say, oh, hey, yeah, this person's got good writing skills. I can also go in there and maybe get a little bit more about your motivation to succeed in graduate school, because a lot of the personal statements and essays are going to be, why do you want to, what are your underlying goals? And so I can see some of that. A lot of times I'll know some of those ideas from my interactions or conversations with the student, but there it is right there, kind of fleshed out in that personal statement or essay. um, and then I think a final thing that I think is very important is include a list or a paragraph about your important accomplishments that are connected to that letter writer. And this is very important. For example, take the fact that I've got a lot of students who work in research labs with me. Well, I don't work on every last detail of a project with every student. Sometimes they're working with some of my graduate students, and so sometimes I get an overview of what's going on, or I don't see every last detail that's being worked on. And so by including this, it is gives me information that I can talk about in my letter. It reminds me and fills out some of the details about some of the things that you did that either A, I might have forgotten, or maybe I just wasn't aware of because it was involved, like I said, working with grad students or something else. So even if you took a class from a professor, for example, just say in class discussions, I wrote a paper on this. Your comments on my paper said perfect APA style, great analysis of competing theories, or something like that. Those are great things because it tells me, it reminds me, hey, not only this is the topic that you wrote about, and I can put that in my paper, and it can, trigger some memories in my head, but it also remind me of my evaluation of your work. And so those are some very good things to include. Don't think of it as bragging. Don't think of it as being, kind of, oh, why, they know me, but like I said, professors work with a lot of different students, and sometimes a lot of time has passed. And if they say anything about you including something like that, just simply say, hey, I just wanted to include that, so you didn't leave anything out, and just in case you forgot something, I just wanted to be thorough. And like I said, people like me and a lot of my other colleagues that I've talked to, we love the inclusion of things like this, because it makes sure that we're going to include every last thing when we want to write a strong letter for our students. Sometimes you can just simply say, this student did well. And then I'm like, okay, well, what ways did they do well? These types of reminders give me information that I can include. All right, so let's start getting into the wrap up here. I want to get into the next slide where I talk about some FAQs here, and then after this, I'm going to open it up to you guys for questions for anything that maybe that wasn't clear, or maybe that I just didn't address directly. So let's talk about some frequent questions that I get about letters of recommendation. Number one, should I check with professors to make sure that they wrote and submitted my letters? I would say yes. You know, do that reminder email, check. Hey, just want to check, make sure you sent off that, the letter. It's okay if you haven't yet, just a reminder that it's due this week. A lot of times professors will then just send you an email and say, yes, I already submitted it. Or they'll see that and it'll be like kind of a kick in the pants to them, and they'll start working on it. And then they'll send you an email like in 3 days. And yep, sent it off today. Good luck. And so I think that's a really good idea. One of the great things with a lot of online portals that when you apply for graduate programs is you can log into those and you can see when professors have submitted their letters. So that's another way you can check as well. Get a question a lot of times from students. What if I don't have 3 people who can write great letters? Well, comes down to a little bit of what type of program are you applying for. If it's a very competitive type of graduate program, let's say maybe med school, or maybe a clinical psych PhD program, or other similar types of highly competitive graduate programs, there you're going to want as many great or good letters as possible, because you have a lot of competition, and you have a lot of strong, high achieving students who are also competing for those limited number of openings. So that case, you really want a lot of, great letters. But for most other programs, your typical other PhD programs, let's say you're applying cognitive psychology or, something else, um, they're aim for one great letter and then two, kind of complementary good letters. That's going to be typical, what's going to do. If you can get more great letters, great, go for it. But you don't necessarily need three fantastic, what I sometimes call walk on water letters, like, you're so great you walk on water. Um, but but yeah, just consider the context of what type of program that you're applying for. A lot of students ask me, should I waive my right to view letters? So as you apply for graduate programs in a lot of websites or portals, you're going to see an option for this. There it's asking you yes or no, do you waive the right to view letters? A lot of times this doesn't matter. My general advice, though, if you're just not sure about anything, is say, yes, I waive my right to view letters. The reason for that is that some professors and some people writing letters are going to feel a little bit more confident about being honest and writing more detailed letters with their thoughts if you waive the right, if they don't think that you're going to go in and want to read them all. Some don't care. Sometimes the professor will just give you a copy. Oh, here's the letter I submitted for you. Go ahead, read it. I don't care. Other professors are going to be a little bit more private, and by checking that box, that's just going to help, reassure them a little bit. But ultimately, like I said, a lot of professors are going to be open and not care. Finally, should I thank my letter writers? Yeah, I say, just like anyone else who does something for you, or whether it's in a professional setting or in your personal life, just simply say thank you. Some people ask, well, do I need to get them a gift or anything like that? No, you don't need to get them a gift. If you want to do something, by all means, if that's in your nature, go for it. Nobody's going to stop them. Um, but in, reality, just a simple, oh, Professor Copeland, thank you so much for letting the writer recommendation for me. I really appreciate it. I'll keep you updated as to whether I get, accepted into any of my programs. That right there, that's enough of a thank you in my book, where student acknowledges the work and effort that I did by writing the letter of recommendation, and it makes me feel good, and I like the fact that they let me know that, hey, I'll keep you updated, because I like to hear success stories, and even in cases where they don't make it in, then maybe I can sit down and chat with that person and say, hey, if you don't make it in, then hey, come back, talk with me. Maybe we'll talk about some strategies about how maybe you can become a stronger applicant next year if you want to apply again. And so reaching out to your professors and saying thank you and keeping them updated, I think, is a very good idea. It's just kind of a nice way to maintain contact and build relationships, and it's just a nice, decent thing to do. All right. So those are some of the frequent questions that I get and I hear from students. So I just want to say thank you for listening to me for this past 20, 30 minutes here. And I do want to open it up the floor to your questions, whether it's detailed questions about your situation, something maybe I didn't go into enough detail about, or maybe just something I just didn't even include. And you can speak in hypotheticals too. That's fine as well.
Hello.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi. I just want to say I don't really technically have a question for you, but the information that you have given is really helpful moving forward.
You're welcome. I think some of these little things are ways that which you can plan out who's going to be a good fit in terms of a letter writer, how to approach them about it, and how to make their life easier. Just those little things can make a difference. Like I said, in some of the examples that I used in there, it can, including everything all organized in a single email versus a whole bunch of separate emails is a huge difference in terms of making things easier on a letter writer like myself. If I have to go hunting for something, I might miss it, and B, it's just going to take up some more of my time or possibly put me in a bad mood. And it's just human nature. You want to make people, as happy as they can be while writing about you.
I do have a question for you, actually. I'm an interdisciplinary major. In my CV, do I have two different CVs or is it one CV that I'm writing about?
With a CV, you can have a general CV that you use for most purposes. One thing that I would recommend about a CV is that, just similar to personal statements, is consider whether you do want to make a specialized one for each application. And typically, you're not going to reinvent the whole document when I mean, a specialized one. It could be something as simple as just reordering some of the sections that you include. For example, I know some students who are applying to some programs that are very research oriented, like PhD programs, and maybe they're also applying to some, applied master's programs that don't really involve research. Well, maybe for those PhD research programs, you lead with those research accomplishments that you have as an undergraduate, but maybe for the applied programs, you lead maybe like with a volunteer or internship experience that you might have, and push the research a little bit, further down in the CV. And so, and those are some small considerations to have in terms of specifying a CV for a particular application.
Okay, thank you.
Like I said during the talk, I think one of the biggest things that I would say is try, if you have time before you're applying for programs, be proactive, build up those relationships. If you can, take a second class from a great professor that you had. If it's a former professor, whether they're at your current institution or a previous one, maintain contact with that person. It can be, like I said, just as simple as a short email once a year, just to reach out and just touch base. Like I said, keep it simple. Don't go overboard. Say thank you, for their, how they impacted you, letting them know about your future, reminding them that you took a class from them and really enjoyed it. Those simple types of things are just ways that you keep you fresh in their minds. And so, a lot of times I find that's worked wonders. I've had students that have done that in the past, and they're just like, yes, I know that name when they reach out to me for a letter of recommendation. I've got a positive impression about this person. So that's a good thing.
We've got time for a couple more questions if anybody has them.
And like I said, while some of your your letter writers might be, primarily from your area or your discipline or major, don't be afraid to get a letter from someone else outside of it. I've written plenty of letters of rec for people from graduate programs. I've had some honors. I've taught some honors classes over the years, and I've had a lot of pre-med students in there, or I've had a pre-med student who worked in my lab for a short period of time. And so I've written letters of rec for them, even though they're a little more bio or medically oriented. I can say some really good things, and it's still, a positive, strong, good letter for them.
Okay, well, if no one else has any questions, thank you so much for being here. That was very informative. That was great.
And thank you for the compliment, Kiara. That I tried to do a good job with this, and so I tried to touch on all the basis of questions that I've heard from students, and I've also tried to think it through. I've been writing letters of rec, for 15, 20, years now, as I've been a professor, and even at the end of when I was a grad student, I even got some requests for it. And so I've been doing this for quite a while, and yeah, I tried to think through over the years, what's worked well for me, and I even talked to students too, as well as their approaches with not just me, but with their colleagues and my colleagues, and other professors with whom they interact. And so yeah, I tried to present a nice, thorough picture for you, if you will.
Wonderful. Thank you for your time and your expertise, and thank you everyone for joining. This recording will be available on the Graduate College YouTube channel in a little bit, so you can always come back and reference it if you forget anything that we talked about today. And yeah, have a great day. Thank you everybody for being here.
All right. Enjoy the rest of your day. And if anyone has a question, you're always welcome to reach out to me specifically. My email is very simple, david.copeland@unlv.edu. And you can just simply send me an email and say, hey, I attended that workshop on letters of rec and just had a quick question. All right. Good luck, everyone.